So I have no money. I'm going to talk about a scoping project, which is a collaboration between Space, RAL Space. I can't even read it from here. RAL Space. I think you all know what that is. And my organisation, the Natural Resources Institute, NRI. So since you all know RAL Space, but you don't know us, a quick introduction. We are an organisation that runs and manages projects in agriculture and natural resources management across the world. We have a particular interest in food supply chains, both internationally and in the UK. And we're based down in Kent, so we're in the area where most of the UK apple production takes place. We have a long-standing research programme on apple storage. So I'm going to introduce you a bit to apple storage. The UK apple industry is worth well over 200 million a year and growing. Most of the apples are actually stored long-term. What you see in these slides are a number of stores that depend not only on low temperature, but we also use controlled atmospheres. So we basically slow down the metabolism of apples by reducing the oxygen concentration so that they breathe more slowly. For good quality, it is absolutely critical for long-term storage to harvest those apples at the right stage of ripeness. So what do I mean by that? What happens when an apple ripens? So a number of things happen. The skin colour changes. For most varieties, you will see that the skin changes from green to yellow, background colour. There are some exceptions. Granny Smith doesn't do that. The apples, when unripe, are full of starch. As they ripen, the starch changes to sugar, and that's really important for the taste. Various bitter compounds also disappear. The texture changes, so the tissues soften. And for us biologists, we can see that there is a change in the concentration of substances or gases such as ethylene, which are the controlling plant hormones. So practically, what the growers do in order to work out when is the right time to harvest is they look at that starch breakdown to sugar. And practically these days, the way that they do that is that they go around the orchard, they pick a lot of apples, they cut them up, and in the back of their 4x4, they stain them with iodine. So the picture at the bottom there, here, is actually what they're doing in the back of their Land Rover. So frankly, a little bit awkward. It's also quite difficult to gauge. What you're seeing on the right-hand side there is a starch staining pattern. So the growers have to be able to assess at what stage the apple is, from black when it's completely starchy down to white when it's pure sugar. So they're looking at that very early stage, top right. So the question is, can we find a method that does not use chemicals, that's quantitative, rapid, and of course very cheap? So the fruit industry generally is exploring a lot of non-destructive technologies. And hyperspectral imaging is one of the technologies that they use. It's used a lot in pack houses and is being increasingly developed to look at the quality of apples. It's expensive. It also suffers from a constraint that the signal has very little penetration, so you're basically looking at the surface. But for this particular application, in some ways, that is ideal, because we're looking at a cut surface. We also, therefore, believe that we can, instead of just seeing the presence or absence of starch, that by using hyperspectral imaging, we may be able to measure the concentration of starch and therefore get an earlier indication of the point at which those apples should be harvested. Luckily, there are some low-cost detectors around. So in the wavelength range from 300 through visible to beyond to 950, there are now low-cost detectors, and there have been a lot of advances in image analysis. Oh, I see. I was told there was a phantom apple on the top left-hand corner. In my computer, it's not there, so can you please ignore the phantom apple? Okay. So if you look through that phantom apple, what you will see is an image which my colleague Melina, who's sitting there, took of a cut apple while I was doing the iodine staining. So what we were seeing there was a very good indicator of the iodine pattern. So we could see very clearly in this particular picture a difference between sugar presence or just starch. If that was the way they all looked, that would be brilliant, but it wasn't. So in this first test, which we carried out, we were quite time constrained because we were picking a time when we could have both mature and immature apples around. So we were constrained to a few weeks in August and September when the apples were maturing on the tree. So we got some reasonably good results, but we clearly had variation, and our belief was that the variation was compounded by the wet on the apples and therefore the reflectant of the water. Okay, so we needed a model system to work on once the apples had all matured and all been picked, essentially. So luckily, one of the companies that we work with provided us with some bananas that had not gone through the ripening process. That's a completely different story. We ended up with unripe and ripe bananas. And so we did some more hyperspectral imaging. So at the top, what you'll see is we're improving some very good distinction between the unripe starchy slices at the top and the ripe sugary slices at the bottom. We did check by iodine staining. We also did a taste test, but that wasn't a load of fun. In order to investigate whether if we could get rid of that water effect, we could have better imaging, we also freeze-dried some samples and did some more analysis of them. So at the bottom, you will see 3 different types of analysis, but in all of them, some very good distinction between the unripe on this side and the ripe on that side. I've actually put some crosses through some of the sections where we had a problem that we could see was due to the uneven surface. So, to sum up, if we are investigating whether the hyperspectral imaging can be used as a tool to optimize apple, we've come a long way. We still have a fairly active discussion within the group as to whether we're using the right wavelengths. So we've focused so far on the shorter wavelengths because that is where we have much cheaper sensors. Due to economy of scale of production of sensors, these are very cheap. It could be that we should be looking at the longer wavelengths where the sensors are more expensive. However, if we can get over the water reflectant problem, then we can use the lower wavelengths with the cheaper sensors. So our next task in that is to work out how to get a good enough diffuse illumination in order to get around that reflectant problem. And we also need equipment to make sure that we have a very clean cut and we don't have a problem with irregularity of the surface. Thank you.